The airport was not too crowded that night, but it wasn't empty either. People moved slowly through the wide halls, some dragging heavy suitcases, others holding small bags close to their sides. There was a quiet kind of noise everywhere. Soft footsteps, distant announcements, and the low hum of conversations that didn't really matter to anyone else. She walked through it all without rushing. There was nothing special about the way she looked at first glance. Simple clothes, no bright colors, no signs that would make someone turn their head twice. But there was something in the way she carried herself. Calm, steady, like someone who had seen too much to be easily shaken. She didn't stop at any shops. She didn't check her phone again and again like many others. She just kept walking, holding her boarding pass in one hand, her small bag resting lightly on her shoulder. When she reached the gate, boarding had already started. A line had formed, but it wasn't chaotic. People stood in quiet patience, moving forward step by step. Some looked tired, others annoyed, a few excited. She joined the line without a word. A man in front of her kept turning around, as if checking how long the line had gotten. A child behind her kept asking questions that no one really answered. But she stayed still, her eyes calm, her mind somewhere far away. When it was her turn, she handed over her boarding pass. The staff member gave a quick glance, then smiled politely and let her through. She nodded once and continued walking down the narrow passage that led to the aircraft. Inside the plane, the air felt different, cool, controlled, and quiet in a way that felt almost unreal. Passengers were already settling in. Bags were being pushed into overhead compartments. Someone was arguing softly about seat numbers. A flight attendant moved through the aisle with a practiced smile, helping wherever needed. She found her seat near the window. It was exactly what she wanted. She placed her bag above carefully, then sat down without making noise. Her movements were simple and efficient. No wasted motion, no hesitation. For a moment, she just sat there, looking out the window. The runway lights stretched into the distance, glowing softly against the darkness. Planes stood still like silent giants, waiting for their turn to rise into the sky. She let out a slow breath. It had been a long day, longer than most people around her could guess. A man took the seat beside her, adjusting himself with small, restless movements. He tried to make a quick comment about the flight being late, but she only gave a small, polite nod. It was enough to end the conversation before it really began. He understood and turned away. That was fine with her. The plane doors closed with a soft but firm sound. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the final checks began. A flight attendant demonstrated safety instructions, her voice calm and clear, even though most people were not paying full attention. She listened anyway, not because she had to, but because she always did. Every word, every detail. It was a habit that never left her. Soon the plane began to move. Slow at first, then a little faster as it made its way toward the runway. The engine sound grew stronger, vibrating gently through the cabin. Some passengers looked out the windows with interest. Others leaned back and closed their eyes. She remained still, her gaze fixed outside. When the plane finally lifted off the ground, there was a brief moment where everything felt weightless. The city lights below began to shrink, turning into tiny glowing dots scattered across the darkness. Within minutes, they were above the clouds. The world outside became quiet and distant. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere softened. People relaxed into their seats. A few small lights flickered on as passengers adjusted their space. The tension of takeoff slowly disappeared. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to rest. It wasn't a deep sleep at first, more like a careful pause. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders relaxed, but her awareness never completely faded. Even in rest, she remained alert in a way that was hard to explain. The man beside her shifted again, trying to get comfortable. A few rows ahead, someone laughed softly at something on their phone. Somewhere behind, a baby made a small sound before settling again. Everything felt normal, peaceful. Time passed quietly. The cabin lights dimmed further, signaling that most people should try to sleep. The gentle hum of the engines became almost soothing, like a steady rhythm that carried everyone forward through the night. She slipped deeper into sleep. Her face looked calm, almost completely at ease. No signs of worry, no signs of stress, just stillness. But even then, there was something different about her. Her posture remained straight, even while resting. Her hands rested lightly, not loosely, as if, at any moment, she could wake up fully without confusion. And then, without warning, everything changed. A sharp sound broke through the calm. It wasn't loud enough to be painful, but it was sudden enough to pull attention instantly. The overhead speakers clicked, followed by a brief silence that felt longer than it really was. Some passengers opened their eyes, confused. Others didn't react right away. Then the captain's voice came through. But it wasn't the calm, routine tone people expected. It was different, urgent. Attention! If there are any fighter pilots on board, please make yourself known immediately. For a second, no one moved. The words didn't fully make sense. A few people looked around, as if expecting someone else to react first. The man beside her frowned slightly, unsure if he heard correctly. A flight attendant paused in the aisle, her expression still controlled, but her eyes more focused than before. The message repeated, clearer this time, more direct. Any fighter pilots on board, please identify yourself to the crew immediately. Now the silence felt heavy. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some whispered quietly. Others sat completely still, trying to understand what was happening. Why would a commercial flight need a fighter pilot? What could be wrong? The calm atmosphere from before disappeared almost instantly. In its place there was tension, not loud or chaotic but real and growing. The woman's eyes opened, not slowly, not with confusion. They opened sharply, fully aware in a single moment. Her breathing changed slightly, becoming more controlled. Her gaze focused straight ahead, listening carefully to every sound, every word. She didn't move right away. Around her, the quiet whispers grew. Did you hear that? What's going on? Is something wrong with the pilots? The man beside her looked at her briefly, as if hoping she might say something. But she remained silent, still, listening. Another announcement was about to come, and whatever happened next would change everything. She knew it, even before anyone else did. And yet, she stayed seated, her hands resting lightly, her expression calm. But inside, something had already shifted. Something she had tried to leave behind. Something that was now slowly rising again. The kind of instinct that doesn't fade with time. The kind that waits, quietly, until the moment it's needed. And that moment had just begun. The cabin was tense now, a sudden electricity running through the air. Passengers sat frozen, their bodies stiff with confusion. Some whispered to each other, small, uncertain sounds, while others simply stared straight ahead, trying to process the announcement they had just heard. Questions filled the silence like invisible sparks. Why would a commercial flight need fighter pilots? What could have gone wrong? Was it a joke? Or something far more serious? The woman remained seated for a few moments, her eyes wide open, scanning the cabin. She didn't panic. There was no fear in her movements, no frantic energy. She only sat still, letting the sounds reach her fully, letting her mind assess every detail. Her body, even in calm, had the subtle tension of someone trained to react instantly if needed. It was a quiet alertness, one that drew nothing to itself but was impossible to miss for someone trained to notice. A flight attendant walked past her row, pausing briefly as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Her eyes flicked to the woman, noting the calmness, and then moved on. She had seen many people startle at unusual announcements, but this passenger was different. Something about her presence made the situation feel controlled in a way that no one could yet understand. Around the plane, murmurs spread. Some passengers clutched their arms across their chests, gripping their bags or clothing. Others leaned closer to their neighbors, seeking comfort in whispered speculation. A few children started to stir, sensing the anxiety in the air, while parents tried to soothe them quietly, their voices tense and low. The contrast between the external calm of the cabin and the internal anxiety of its occupants created a strange, thick tension. The announcement came again, louder this time, insistent. The captain's voice cut through the cabin, urgent and direct. We repeat, if there are any fighter pilots on board, please report to the crew immediately. There was no room for misunderstanding this time. The crew needed help and they needed it now. Passengers looked around, searching for someone who might stand. No one moved. Eyes met eyes, and silent questions passed without answers. A man in the aisle squirmed uncomfortably, checking his phone as if he could call someone to explain the situation. A young woman in the row ahead whispered to her companion, trying to make sense of it. The quiet panic spread like a subtle wave. The woman's body shifted slightly. She did not rise immediately, but her posture changed. Shoulders squared, hands rested firmly on her lap. Her breathing slowed to a controlled rhythm, almost imperceptible but precise, measured. It was a movement that spoke of readiness, of knowing exactly what needed to happen and when. The moment for action had come, and she was poised to respond. Her eyes met those of the flight attendant once more, briefly. No words were exchanged, but a silent acknowledgement passed between them. The woman understood that she was being observed not as a passenger, but as someone who could make a difference. There was trust implicit in that look, fragile but unmistakable. A co-passenger near the window behind her began to whisper loudly, breaking the fragile calm. "Are we really in danger?" he asked, his voice trembling. His companion reached over to hold his hand, but the movement only made his anxiety more apparent. The woman's gaze moved toward them briefly, not in judgment but in assessment. She noted the fear, the uncertainty, the way the human mind reacts in sudden crisis. She had seen this before in other situations under other circumstances, where calmness could save lives. The plane hit a small patch of turbulence, shaking slightly as it moved above the clouds. Seats creaked. A cup rattled on the fold-down tray in front of a child, and the cabin lights flickered just enough to remind everyone that they were not in total control. A quiet, collective intake of breath rippled through the rows. Some passengers clutched the armrests. Others silently prayed. The woman remained steady, anchored in her seat, a single point of stillness amid the subtle chaos. The captain's voice came again, now more strained. "We are experiencing a situation that requires immediate assistance. Any trained personnel, military or otherwise, please come forward." The repetition had a different effect this time. Passengers who had been unsure began to glance around at each other. Hesitation wavered. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. The woman finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, she unbuckled her seatbelt. The motion was careful, controlled, and precise. She did not rush. Her hands were steady, her movements economical and purposeful. She rose from her seat and paused for a single moment, gathering herself before stepping into the aisle. Heads turned. Passengers noticed her calm demeanor. Unlike the rest, she carried no trace of panic, no nervous fidgeting. Her eyes held focus, clarity, a sharp intelligence that seemed to cut through the fog of confusion around her. Some stared, wondering who she was and why she looked so ready while everyone else seemed frozen. A flight attendant immediately approached her, motioning toward the front. "We need your help," she said, her voice low but firm. "Can you assist the cockpit?" The woman nodded once, simply. No explanation, no hesitation. She followed the flight attendant down the aisle, her footsteps quiet but purposeful. Other passengers watched, curiosity and tension mingling in their expressions. Some whispered guesses. Some stared silently, unsure of what to expect. The movement of one person, calm and confident, had a ripple effect on everyone in the cabin. As she moved forward, the flight attendant guided her to the cockpit door. The sounds of the cabin faded behind her. There were no dramatic gestures, no heroics, just steady, purposeful action. When the door opened, the situation inside became clear. The co-pilot was struggling, visibly stressed, while the captain maintained control but clearly needed assistance. Instruments and systems blinked under the soft glow of the cockpit lights, each one demanding careful attention. The woman entered without pause. She assessed the space quickly, noting the controls, the displays, the tension in the air. Her hands hovered briefly before settling on the instruments, moving with familiarity. Every motion precise, every glance intentional. The co-pilot looked at her with relief and a hint of astonishment. The captain's eyes met hers, a mix of gratitude and urgency flashing in their gaze. No words were wasted. The woman began to assist, guiding small adjustments, providing suggestions, and handling tasks with the skill of someone who had trained for exactly these moments. It was not just knowledge. It was instinct, honed through experience, attention to detail, and countless hours of preparation. Each movement inspired quiet confidence in those around her. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere began to shift. Passengers noticed a change, subtle but undeniable. The fear and uncertainty that had gripped them was slowly giving way to something different. They could not see what was happening in the cockpit, but the calm presence moving down the aisle and the quiet authority it implied began to ripple through the rows. The man who had been fidgeting beside her original seat now looked more at ease. A woman in the row ahead whispered to her companion about the passenger who had stood up. Her words filled with admiration and curiosity. Even the child in the back seemed to sense that the danger might be under control, leaning against a parent with slightly less tension in their small body. The woman continued her work, never raising her voice, never showing signs of fear. Each adjustment she made, each observation she offered, was executed with the quiet precision of someone who knew exactly how critical each moment was. Time seemed to stretch and compress at once. Every second mattered. Every small decision had consequences that could not be reversed. Outside, the clouds moved slowly past the windows, the world beyond unaware of the tension unfolding above. Inside, every heartbeat seemed amplified, yet the woman's calm acted as an anchor for those around her. She was not seeking attention. She was not performing. She was simply acting, fully present, fully aware, fully capable. The captain's voice occasionally broke through, clipped and focused. Instructions were exchanged, clarifications made, and together they worked to stabilize the situation. The co-pilot, still visibly tense, followed her lead, finding reassurance in her expertise. The instruments responded to their careful coordination, systems stabilizing under the guidance of practiced hands. Minutes passed that felt like hours. The quiet hum of the engines, once background noise, became a constant reminder of the life suspended above the clouds. Outside, the night remained calm, indifferent to the human struggle within. Inside, every decision was critical, every movement deliberate. As the woman continued to assist, her thoughts were focused, uncluttered by fear or distraction. She was fully immersed in the task at hand, aware of every detail, yet able to remain calm in the midst of uncertainty. It was a rare combination, one that few could understand but many would remember. And though she had been a quiet passenger just moments before, she had now become the central figure in the unfolding drama. The passengers, still unaware of her full story, began to sense that she was the reason they might all remain safe. A silent acknowledgement passed through the cabin, subtle but present, as eyes followed her movements, hearts beating a little faster, a little steadier, in rhythm with her calm determination. The moment had arrived. The woman was no longer just a traveler seeking rest. She was a presence of control, a living instrument of calm in the midst of uncertainty. The crisis was far from over, but with her there was hope. Quiet, steady, unwavering hope that had arrived suddenly in the middle of a night flight and would not be forgotten. The cockpit felt tense, a space full of machines, lights, and the quiet hum of a plane flying high above the earth. The co-pilot's hands trembled slightly as he tried to keep everything steady. The captain's eyes were sharp, scanning the instruments, voice clipped, but there was a strain hidden behind the practiced control. Both of them knew that even small mistakes could have serious consequences. They needed someone who could step in, someone who understood the pressure and the stakes. The woman stood for a moment just inside the doorway, taking everything in. She didn't speak at first. She simply observed. Every dial, every screen, Every subtle indicator of the aircraft's condition registered in her mind. Her eyes flicked to the captain, then to the co-pilot, reading the tension, understanding the urgency. She didn't have to ask questions. She didn't need explanations. She simply knew what had to happen. A small nod from the flight attendant outside the cockpit gave her the last confirmation she needed. Without hesitation, she stepped fully inside, her movements smooth, confident, precise. She took a position at the side of the controls, her hands hovering briefly before making adjustments with quiet authority. Every motion seemed intentional, almost instinctual, as if her body remembered things her mind had long left behind. The co-pilot exhaled sharply, relief flickering across his face. "Thank you," he murmured, though his voice was still strained. The captain's gaze met hers for the briefest instant, and something unspoken passed between them. Trust. Not the kind built over hours of casual interaction, but the kind that comes from seeing someone act decisively when it matters most. The first problem appeared almost immediately. The plane was approaching a strong pocket of turbulence, and the instruments began to register minor but rapid fluctuations. Many passengers would have been unaware, but in the cockpit, every dip and shift mattered. The woman's hands moved to stabilize certain controls, adjustments so subtle that a casual observer wouldn't notice, but enough to ease the strain on the co-pilot. The captain issued brief commands, his voice controlled but urgent. Maintain altitude. Adjust heading 2 degrees north. Watch speed carefully. Each instruction required precision, and she executed them without hesitation. The co-pilot watched, learning quickly from her calm, assured actions. He began to mirror some of her subtle movements, following her lead with a mix of relief and awe. Outside, the night sky was calm and vast. Clouds moved silently below, distant and unaware of the drama unfolding above them. But inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was charged. Machines and people worked together in tense harmony. Every decision mattered. Every adjustment could change the outcome. The plane's fate hung in balance, yet the presence of the woman brought a strange sense of order to the chaos. The captain spoke again, voice low but precise. "Systems are stabilizing. Keep monitoring the instruments closely." The woman responded with quiet nods, occasionally adjusting controls or issuing small suggestions. Each action was deliberate, measured, the product of both skill and instinct. She had done this before, though never under these exact circumstances. Experience and training allowed her to act without hesitation. A sudden alarm sounded, a small blinking light indicating a minor system warning. The co-pilot's fingers froze for a split second, uncertainty flashing in his eyes. The woman reacted instantly, diagnosing the issue quickly. She instructed him on a precise adjustment, and within moments, the alert ceased. Her calm efficiency reassured the captain, who allowed himself a single exhale of relief. Meanwhile, in the cabin behind them, passengers were beginning to sense that something extraordinary was happening at the front of the plane. A few had seen the woman rise from her seat, and now there was an unspoken energy spreading through the rows. Some whispered to their neighbors, quietly noting her presence, wondering who she was and how she could possibly bring such calm to a tense situation. The turbulence worsened for a brief moment, shaking the plane more violently. Drinks sloshed in cups, a few items fell from trays, and passengers gripped their armrests tightly. The woman's hands never wavered, her movements precise, her focus absolute. She guided the co-pilot through corrections, anticipating the plane's reactions before they fully occurred. The aircraft responded smoothly, a testament to her skill and understanding. The captain's voice cut through the noise again, steady and controlled. "We're approaching a safer altitude. Adjust speed gradually and prepare for continued monitoring." The woman followed each command flawlessly, communicating with the co-pilot in concise, clear phrases. There was no panic, no hesitation. Each word carried meaning and purpose, ensuring that everyone understood their role and the next steps. The co-pilot began to relax slightly, following her instructions with increasing confidence. He glanced at her occasionally, clearly impressed by her ability to act under pressure without showing a trace of fear. She was not just assisting. She was leading quietly, guiding the cockpit through a tense moment with authority and calm. Back in the cabin, the tension among passengers began to shift. They still didn't know exactly what was happening, but the presence of the woman moving confidently through the aisle earlier had left an impression. Some passengers whispered about her, speculating about her past, her experience. Others simply observed, realizing that a single individual could make a significant difference when courage and skill met. The plane hit another patch of turbulence. More sudden this time. Instruments blinked. The co-pilot's hands trembled briefly. The woman reacted instantly, her movements fluid and precise. She adjusted the controls, advised on corrections, and monitored the instruments with an unwavering focus. The plane stabilized, and the cabin regained a measure of calm. A brief silence fell in the cockpit, each of them breathing slowly, measuring the next step. The woman glanced at the captain, then at the co-pilot, her eyes sharp and observant. "We need to continue monitoring, but systems are responding well," she said, her voice calm and deliberate. There was no fear, only clarity. Her words conveyed confidence, and the others followed her guidance without question. She moved through each check systematically, her hands and eyes constantly scanning the instruments. Every minor fluctuation, every slight change in readings, was noticed and addressed. The plane responded as if guided by an invisible hand, each adjustment subtle but effective. The co-pilot followed her example, learning from her instincts and knowledge in real time. Time stretched in a way that felt both fast and slow. Each second was filled with tension, but also with purpose. The captain issued commands sparingly, knowing that overloading the cockpit with too much information could create mistakes. The woman anticipated the needs of the aircraft, providing small but critical guidance to prevent any complications. The co-pilot's confidence grew as he followed her instructions. He began to trust her instincts, recognizing that her calm demeanor and precise actions were keeping them safe. Even the captain allowed himself a brief moment of relief, though he remained focused on the broader flight path and overall safety. Outside the cockpit, the world remained quiet and indifferent. Clouds drifted past, distant and silent. The moonlight shimmered on the surfaces of the instruments, casting faint reflections inside the small, tense space. Yet inside, every heartbeat, every decision, carried weight. Every subtle adjustment mattered. The woman continued to work, never rushing, never hesitating. Her calm presence was infectious, spreading to those around her and creating a quiet order in the chaos. She did not seek recognition, did not speak more than necessary. She simply acted, guided by instinct and experience, with every movement deliberate and precise. Minutes passed. The plane began to stabilize, instruments showing steady readings, systems responding properly, turbulence easing. The captain allowed a quiet exhale, the co-pilot visibly relieved, though still cautious. The woman remained attentive, her focus unwavering. She knew the situation was far from over, but she had restored control to a degree that allowed for careful monitoring. In the cabin, passengers noticed subtle signs of reassurance. Flight attendants moved with more confidence, adjusting service quietly and efficiently. Some passengers whispered softly, realizing that something remarkable was unfolding. The woman had become an unseen force of calm, a guiding presence whose skill and composure were shaping the outcome of the flight. She continued to check instruments, provide guidance, and ensure the plane responded to every adjustment. Each action, though small, contributed to a growing sense of order. The crisis, once tense and unpredictable, was slowly being brought under control. And through it all, she remained focused, calm, and fully present. Every glance, every hand movement, every decision reflected someone who had trained for moments like this, someone who had faced intense pressure before and emerged with skill and clarity. By the time the immediate turbulence had passed and systems were stabilized, it was clear that the woman had made a difference. The captain's nod, subtle but filled with gratitude, acknowledged her contribution. The co-pilot, still catching his breath, looked at her with respect and relief. Outside, the night remained quiet and indifferent. clouds drifting silently past. Inside the cockpit, a tense moment had been transformed into careful control, thanks to the presence and actions of a single person. And though the passengers remained unaware of the full story, the ripple of calm and confidence would soon reach them, changing their experience of the flight in ways they could not yet understand. The woman remained at her post, alert and ready, knowing that the next challenge could arrive at any moment. She did not seek recognition, she did not seek thanks. She only knew the responsibility she had assumed and the skill she had to apply. Her presence was quiet, but it was powerful, shaping the outcome of events high above the earth in a way few could see, but everyone would feel. The plane moved steadily above the clouds, but the calm was fragile. Outside, the night sky was clear, the moonlight reflecting off patches of thin clouds, giving no hint of the tension inside. The cabin was quiet, almost painfully so. Passengers sat stiffly in their seats, some gripping armrests, some staring at the ceiling, unable to look away from the subtle anxiety in the air. The earlier announcement about fighter pilots had left a mark. They were uncertain, uneasy, yet none of them could understand the full story unfolding in the cockpit. Inside the cockpit, the woman continued to work, her hands steady, her eyes moving quickly across the instruments. Each reading, each gauge, each light was noted and interpreted. She didn't rush. Every action was deliberate. The captain and co-pilot followed her guidance, adjusting controls, responding to instructions, and learning to trust her instinctual decisions. The aircraft was a living machine in her hands, responding to subtle adjustments that only someone experienced could recognize. A sudden bump jolted the plane. Turbulence was increasing, stronger than before. The cabin shifted, drinks spilled, and a low murmur ran through the passengers. Children whimpered softly. A few people gasped. The calm that had returned after the first scare seemed to waver. The co-pilot's hands tightened on the controls, his knuckles white, a sign of the stress building once more. The woman reacted instantly. Her movements were fluid, practiced. She guided minor adjustments to counteract the turbulence, her fingers moving across controls with precision. She spoke softly, issuing concise instructions that required no unnecessary words. The co-pilot followed, the tension easing slightly as he watched her handle the situation with ease. Even the captain allowed a brief nod of approval, recognizing her skill and calm presence. "Adjust throttle slightly," she instructed, her voice calm but firm. "Angle 5 degrees north. Watch altitude." Every word mattered. Every adjustment was critical. The turbulence continued, but the plane's response was smoother, more controlled. Her expertise was not just in the mechanics of flying, but in predicting the plane's behavior, anticipating potential issues before they could develop. The co-pilot, though still tense, began to mirror her movements. He had been trained for emergency situations, but he had never encountered someone with her level of instinctive knowledge. It was clear she had been in similar high-pressure scenarios before. He realized quickly that following her lead was the only way to ensure stability. In the cabin, passengers shifted uneasily. A man in the middle row whispered to his companion, "Do you think the pilot's okay?" The companion shook her head, unsure. The flight attendants moved quietly, their eyes constantly flicking to the cockpit door, aware that someone had stepped forward to handle a critical situation. The woman's presence at the front, though hidden, from most of them radiated control. The plane hit another strong patch of turbulence. Lights flickered slightly. A few passengers gripped their seats in fear. The woman's eyes remained sharp, scanning instruments, noting subtle changes in altitude, air pressure, and engine performance. She adjusted controls with deliberate precision. The co-pilot followed her guidance, and the aircraft responded almost immediately, stabilizing despite the violent shake. Time seemed to stretch in the cockpit. Each second felt loaded with significance. Every decision mattered, and every small error could have serious consequences. The captain issued commands sparingly, recognizing the importance of not overwhelming the situation with too many instructions. The woman anticipated the next steps, guiding adjustments and monitoring systems with a balance of instinct and experience that was extraordinary. A sudden alert sounded on the instrument panel. It was minor but required immediate attention. The co-pilot hesitated, uncertainty flashing across his face. The woman reacted without a moment's pause, diagnosing the issue in seconds. She directed a series of precise actions, and within moments, the alert cleared. The co-pilot exhaled, visibly relieved. Even the captain allowed himself a quiet sigh of acknowledgement. Outside the cockpit, the night remained calm and indifferent. Stars twinkled far above, and clouds drifted silently beneath. But inside, every heartbeat, every motion, every adjustment mattered. The plane's stability depended on split-second decisions, anticipation, and skill. The woman provided all three in abundance. She continued her systematic work, checking instruments, monitoring the engines, and advising on adjustments. Her presence was quiet but commanding. She never raised her voice unnecessarily, never showed signs of panic. She simply acted, fully aware of the responsibility on her shoulders, and her skill radiated through every movement. The co-pilot began to trust her instincts completely. Each instruction she gave brought a subtle but noticeable improvement in the plane's performance. He started to follow her lead without hesitation, finding reassurance in her calm authority. Even the captain, whose experience and composure were undeniable, allowed himself a rare moment of relief. Another wave of turbulence hit, stronger than before. The cabin rattled, cups spilled, passengers gripped their armrests and held their breath. The woman's hands moved quickly, adjusting controls, stabilizing the aircraft with subtle but effective corrections. Her voice remained calm, providing precise instructions to the co-pilot. The plane responded, regaining stability despite the violent movements outside. In the cabin, whispers spread among passengers. They noticed the small changes in the atmosphere, the way flight attendants moved with more confidence, the subtle indications that the situation was under control. Many had no idea why, but they felt it. The quiet presence at the front of the plane. Someone acting decisively, skillfully, calmly was making a difference. The woman checked systems carefully, scanning instruments for any sign of trouble. Every minor fluctuation was addressed immediately. She communicated clearly with the co-pilot, issuing concise instructions and ensuring that every adjustment was understood. The plane moved more smoothly, turbulence becoming less threatening as her guidance steadied both the aircraft and those controlling it. Time stretched again, each moment filled with focus, tension, and careful action. The captain gave precise commands, the co-pilot followed her lead, and the plane responded with stability. The woman's calm authority radiated throughout the cockpit, creating an environment where even the most stressful moments could be managed effectively. Passengers in the cabin began to sense the shift. The tension, though still present, was no longer overwhelming. The flight attendants moved confidently, reassured by the unseen control at the front. Whispers spread, speculation about the mysterious passenger who had stepped forward began to circulate, though few could understand the full extent of her actions. Another alert appeared briefly on the instrument panel. The co-pilot's hands moved automatically, following her instructions. She guided him through the resolution, and within moments, the issue was resolved. Her skill, calm, and precise actions continued to stabilize the situation, keeping the aircraft under control despite the challenges it faced. Outside, the sky remained quiet. Clouds drifted silently. The moonlight illuminated the instruments, casting faint reflections in the cockpit. Inside, the tension had been transformed into careful control, a balance maintained through skill, experience, and instinct. Minutes passed, each one filled with purposeful action. The turbulence lessened, systems stabilized, and the plane regained a steady rhythm. The captain's voice remained calm, issuing commands as necessary. The co-pilot followed her guidance flawlessly. The woman continued to monitor instruments, ready to act at any sign of trouble, fully aware of the responsibility she carried. In the cabin, passengers felt the subtle change. The fear that had gripped them was easing. The presence of someone capable at the front of the plane, though unseen, was now palpable. Confidence, however small, began to replace the tension. People whispered softly, some sharing glances of relief, others simply sitting quietly, feeling the effect of her calm authority. The woman continued to check and recheck, moving through systems systematically, monitoring every gauge, every instrument, every potential issue. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and informed by experience. Each adjustment made the plane more stable. Each instruction reassured the co-pilot and even the captain. Time passed. The turbulence eased further. Systems responded predictably. The plane's motion became smooth, controlled, steady. The crisis, once tense and unpredictable, was now under careful management. The presence of the woman, her skill, and her calm authority had shifted the outcome. What could have been chaos was now manageable, controlled, and guided by expertise. And yet, she remained vigilant. She knew the situation was not over. She continued to monitor, to adjust, to guide, fully aware that even small errors could have serious consequences. Her calm was not casual. It was intentional, purposeful, and necessary. The passengers, still unaware of the full story, began to sense that the danger was being managed. Some whispered quietly about the mysterious woman who had stepped forward. Others simply observed the subtle changes in the cabin, feeling an unspoken reassurance. The woman continued her work, fully focused, fully aware, fully present. The plane moved steadily, systems responding to her guidance. The co-pilot followed her lead, learning and trusting. The captain, experienced and composed, allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The crisis, though not entirely resolved, was now under control. Through it all, she remained calm, precise, and ready. Every movement, every glance, every instruction reflected someone who had faced intense pressure before and knew how to manage it effectively. Her presence had transformed the cockpit, stabilized the aircraft, and set the stage for the next phase of the flight, where careful monitoring and continued skill would be required to ensure a safe journey. She had become the anchor, the quiet force guiding the plane through the turbulence, both literal and metaphorical, and ensuring that every person on board had a chance to see the end of the flight safely. The plane was finally beginning its descent. The steady hum of the engines filled the cockpit, a constant reminder of the altitude they had maintained for hours. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten slightly, hints of dawn brushing the horizon. The turbulence had calmed, systems were responding reliably, and the immediate crisis was under control. Still, vigilance was required. The woman remained alert, her eyes scanning instruments, her hands poised to act at the slightest sign of trouble. The co-pilot had regained much of his composure. He followed her guidance smoothly, executing instructions without hesitation. The captain, who had remained composed throughout, allowed a quiet moment of acknowledgement. Their eyes met hers briefly, gratitude clear without the need for words. Her calm authority had guided them through the most difficult moments, transforming tension into stability with precise, deliberate actions. In the cabin, the atmosphere was beginning to shift. Passengers, who had been tense and uncertain, now moved with cautious relief. Flight attendants walked down the aisles, checking on passengers with calm efficiency. The whispers that had filled the rows were softer now, fewer in number, tinged with curiosity and admiration. Some passengers glanced toward the cockpit door, sensing that the quiet presence at the front had been critical to their safety, though none could fully understand the extent of her contribution. The woman did not relax. She remained alert, monitoring the instruments, anticipating changes, and offering guidance. Every decision she made, every subtle adjustment, ensured that the aircraft remained stable as it descended. The altitude changed gradually, speed adjusted carefully, and the plane responded to her actions with precision. It was a delicate dance, one that required skill, patience, and focus, and she performed it flawlessly. The co-pilot glanced at her occasionally, a mixture of relief and respect in his expression. He had seen many situations in his career, but few with such controlled intensity. Her presence had shifted the balance in the cockpit, providing confidence where fear had been. Her instincts, honed through experience, had allowed them to navigate turbulence, system warnings, and uncertainty with a calm precision that left a lasting impression. Passengers remained largely unaware of the technical details, but they felt the shift. Nervous glances were replaced by quiet sighs of relief. Children rested against their parents, some dozing lightly. Adults exchanged whispers about the mysterious passenger who had stood up to assist in the cockpit. Speculation filled the air. Who was she? How did she know what to do? Her calm presence had radiated through the cabin, offering reassurance even to those who had never met her. The captain issued a series of commands for the final stages of the descent. The woman followed each instruction with precision, making slight adjustments to the controls, monitoring instruments, and communicating clearly with the co-pilot. The plane responded smoothly, descending gradually without any jolts or sudden shifts. The engines, flight path, and altitude were all maintained under careful supervision, and the tension that had gripped the aircraft began to ease. A final alert appeared briefly on the instrument panel. The co-pilot instinctively reached for the controls, but the woman's calm voice guided him through the resolution. Within moments, the warning cleared, and stability returned. The co-pilot exhaled, visibly relieved, while the captain offered a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The aircraft was safe, controlled, and responding predictably to the skilled hands in the cockpit. Outside, the city lights below began to grow more distinct. Roads, buildings, and streets slowly appeared, tiny lights sparkling in the pre-dawn darkness. The clouds parted in places, revealing glimpses of the landscape below. For most passengers, the sight was a welcome sign of approaching safety, though few realized how critical the moments above had been. The woman's focus remained unwavering. She continued to monitor every gauge, every instrument, every subtle change in the plane's behavior. Even with the immediate danger past, she knew that the landing required careful attention. Descending an aircraft, especially after hours of high-tension flight, demanded precision and vigilance. She remained fully engaged, her hands ready, her mind alert, and her instincts sharp. Passengers shifted in their seats, some nervously, some with growing confidence. Flight attendants moved quietly, reassuring those who looked anxious and preparing the cabin for landing. The quiet hum of the engines was steady, a comforting rhythm that had guided them through turbulence and crisis alike. The captain's voice, calm and measured, announced the final approach. "We are beginning our descent to the airport. Please remain seated and keep seatbelts fastened." The tone was routine, but it carried a subtle note of reassurance. Passengers tightened their seatbelts, settled into their seats, and prepared for landing. The co-pilot followed her lead, adjusting the instruments and controls according to her guidance. She provided clear instructions, anticipating each minor adjustment and ensuring the aircraft remained stable. The plane responded smoothly, its movements precise and controlled. The tension in the cockpit, though still present, had shifted from crisis to careful management. As the runway approached, the city lights grew brighter. Passengers pressed their faces to the windows, taking in the scenery with a mixture of curiosity and relief. Some whispered softly to companions, sharing quiet gratitude for the unseen hands guiding the flight. Though they did not know her name, they understood that the woman's presence had been crucial to their safety. The plane touched down smoothly. The wheels met the runway with a controlled, steady motion. A brief moment of tension passed as the engines adjusted, and then the aircraft slowed, taxiing toward the gate. Relief filled the cabin in subtle, quiet ways. Passengers exhaled softly, some smiling, some whispering quietly. The crisis had passed, and safety had been restored. The woman remained at her post until the plane fully stopped. She ensured that all systems were stable, instruments monitored, and engines idle. Only then did she finally allow herself a subtle shift of relaxation. Her calm focus had guided the flight through its most difficult moments, and now she could allow the plane to come to a complete stop. Passengers began to disembark. Some clapped quietly, unsure why but feeling compelled to show appreciation. Flight attendants moved efficiently, guiding people off the plane while offering smiles and reassurance. The woman stepped from the cockpit, her movements still measured and calm. She did not seek recognition or attention, but her presence radiated quiet authority and competence. The captain approached her briefly, a look of gratitude in his eyes. He offered thanks, his words deliberate but sincere. She nodded, accepting the acknowledgement quietly, without comment. She did not linger. There was no need for applause, no need for explanation. Her work had been done, and that was enough. Passengers whispered among themselves as they left the plane. Stories began to form, speculation about the mysterious passenger who had stepped forward to help. Some guessed she was a former pilot, others imagined military training. Everyone sensed that something extraordinary had occurred, though few could fully grasp the skill and composure that had been displayed. The woman walked through the terminal, unhurried, blending into the crowd. She did not stop to recount the events, did not seek acknowledgement. Her mind was already moving on. Her thoughts focused on the simple act of moving forward after the intense hours she had just experienced. Some passengers glanced back, curious about the calm figure moving quietly through the terminal. They sensed her presence, even in passing, and some whispered again, sharing stories that would linger in memory. She had become an unseen anchor during a moment of high tension, her calm authority guiding not only the cockpit, but also the spirits of everyone on board. The city beyond the airport continued its early morning rhythm, indifferent to the events high above just moments before. The sky brightened gradually, the first hints of daylight brushing the horizon. Life moved on, but for those on the flight, the memory of the tense night and the quiet heroism they had witnessed would remain. The woman paused briefly at the terminal exit. She looked back once, not with pride, but with acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. A plane had carried hundreds of people safely across the sky, and her presence had been the difference between uncertainty and control. She allowed herself a brief, deep breath, a moment of quiet reflection before stepping forward into the city, into the next chapter of her life, unhurried and unobserved. Passengers would remember the relief, the quiet shift from tension to calm, and the presence of someone extraordinary. They would not know her name, her past, or the full extent of her skill. But the story of the flight, of the calm hands that guided them safely, would remain etched in memory, a testament to courage, composure, and quiet human excellence. As she disappeared into the flow of the terminal, the plane behind her sat at the gate, engines idle, systems monitored, and passengers slowly dispersing. A crisis had been met with skill, calm, and precision. Lives had been carried safely across the night sky, guided by someone who had acted without hesitation, without need for recognition, but with unwavering focus and skill. The woman continued walking, blending seamlessly with the crowd, a quiet figure whose actions had made all the difference. And though she would not be remembered by name, the impact of her presence, the calm she had brought, and the lives she had helped protect would remain, felt by every person who had been on that flight, an invisible yet powerful mark of courage and human competence. By the time the passengers left the terminal, the memory of the flight had begun to transform. Stories would circulate, whispers of the quiet hero who had stepped forward, blending myth and reality. And somewhere in the city, the woman walked on, carrying nothing but the calm assurance that she had done what needed to be done, and nothing more. She had slept peacefully before the crisis, and now, having guided the plane to safety, she returned to her life just as quietly, her role complete, her presence unrecognized but profoundly felt, leaving behind a story that would be remembered in fragments, in whispers, in the subtle gratitude of hundreds who had survived because of one person's skill, focus, and courage.